My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day.
On April the 2nd, Donald Trump announced widespread tariffs on imports to the USA. What followed was economic chaos.
U.S. markets plunged today in the wake of President Trump's announcement of new tariffs.
The Nasdaq's getting crushed. Small caps are getting crushed.
This is a shock to the system.
Even worse than it was during the 2008 financial crisis.
Despite the crashing markets, Trump's team promised to stay firm.
I don't think there's any chance that President Trump's going to back off his tariffs.
The president made it clear yesterday this is not a negotiation.
Trump posted this morning, "My policies will never change."
But then, a week after the tariffs were announced,
this is a CBS News special report. President Trump making big news this afternoon. He's just announced a 90-day pause on tariffs.
On the day of the reversal, the stock market bounced back, but it's still dramatically down from the time Trump came to power.
Yippee, they're getting a little bit yippee, a little bit afraid.
There are many ways Donald Trump's chaotic approach will be awful for America economically, but in this video I want to focus on how it will be a disaster for Donald Trump politically. Now, this shouldn't be surprising. Voters don't like politicians who do stupid things that hurt the country. And yet Trump has done and said many things that critics would call stupid, without any seeming impact on his support. So why would it be different this time? Well, in this video I want to answer that question and share 3 reasons why Trump's chaotic tariffs policy will cause him big problems in a way his previous blunders haven't. Doing this also gives us a chance to observe a new aspect of US politics, and so hopefully this video will, like all on this channel, give you an idea that will be useful for understanding the news long after today's headlines have been forgotten. So join us for the story of Donald Trump's self-destructive tariff chaos. Before I start, a quick thank you to this video's sponsor. They didn't choose this video's topic, but as you'll see later, there turned out to be quite a link. Trump's tariffs are meant to stop America being ripped off, make it independent, and to move manufacturing back to the US. And there are many reasons to think they're stupid. Putting a tax on every import will mean higher prices. The tariffs are happening too quickly and with too much uncertainty for manufacturers to adjust. After all, it takes years to build new factories, and few want to make those investments if they're worried about a recession. As well as the fact that there are many things from bananas to coffee that America can never be independent in. Also, Trump seems to believe other countries are imposing tariffs on America, when often it's just that the US has a trade deficit with that country. I mean, as many commentators have pointed out, I have a trade deficit with my local supermarket. But just because I buy lots of things from there and they don't buy things from me, that doesn't mean I'm being ripped off. Anyway, unsurprisingly for everyone but Donald Trump, the economic results of all this were awful, and even after his pause, things look difficult.
Stock futures are falling once again this morning despite an historic rally yesterday.
They're resuming their plunge, the Dow down about 1,000 points.
Keep in mind there's still a 10% across the board tariff on 90 countries, plus 25% on Canada and Mexico. It's still going to affect nearly everything everybody buys in America.
Okay, so the economics are not looking good. But how will this mean political disaster for Donald Trump?
Next Tuesday, all of you will go to the polls. You'll stand there in the polling place and make a decision. I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
The first reason a sinking economy is bad for politicians is fairly obvious. Voters care about the economy. This was what Ronald Reagan knew when he famously asked voters to consider if they were better off than they were 4 years ago. Later, Bill Clinton strategist James Carville would become famous for the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid," that captured the same idea. In fact, Donald Trump himself has acknowledged how important the economy was in his own victory.
And I went on groceries. It's a very simple word, groceries. Like almost, who uses the word? I started using the word, the groceries, when you buy apples, when you buy bacon.
Yes, the price of groceries, a word Trump seems to believe he invented, was important for voters in 2024. And while this was true for all voters, it was especially true for Trump voters. Many voters supported Trump because they believed he was good with money and would be good with the economy. But his reputation on that topic is now damaged. It all reminds me of a situation we had in the UK, when Liz Truss's government announced 45 billion of unfunded tax cuts in a mini-budget. The result was economic disaster. Borrowing rates went up, the value of the pound dropped, and after insisting for weeks there would be no reversal, Truss fired a chancellor and reversed all the tax cuts. Despite this, confidence in her was shattered, and she soon resigned, the shortest-serving Prime Minister in UK history, with the Conservative Party, its reputation for economic competence destroyed, later having its worst defeat since its formation in the 1830s. So, that's the first reason. The economy is voters' number one issue, and so losing your reputation for economic competence is fatal. The second reason all this is especially bad for Donald Trump is that the Democrats have been out of the picture.
To me, it is almost unthinkable why Senate Democrats would vote to hand the few pieces of leverage that we have away for free.
In March, the Democratic leadership was widely criticised by others on the left for their decision to help pass a Republican spending bill that prevented a government shutdown. But while at the time I could see both sides of that argument, it does happen to have worked out well for the Democrats. If the Democrats had shut down the government in March, they would have inserted themselves into the story, which of course is usually what you want an opposition to do. But the way things have turned out, their absence means it's hard for Trump to blame them and a government shutdown for the economic chaos. And if you want evidence of this, just look at the way Donald Trump is talking about the economic problems.
Monday morning, the president doubled down, posting, quote, "Don't be weak, don't be stupid, don't be a panican," a term the president said represented a, quote, "new party based on weak and stupid people."
Instead of blaming others, Democrats or whoever, which is something Donald Trump is very talented at, he's had to resort to telling people off for being weak and panicky. What's more, after Trump had done his thing, the Democrats became more visible with nationwide protests.
Demonstrators pushing back on the Trump administration's economic policies.
Trump and Musk have got to go!
Just 5 months ago, as Biden left office, the US economy was taking off, the envy of the world. And now it's in chaotic decline. And Trump, because the Democrats have not been part of the story, will find it hard to blame anyone but himself. The final reason why all this is bad for Donald Trump is to do with the information environment US politics operates in. You know, echo chambers, filter bubbles, the fragmentation of the public sphere, whatever you call it, the United States has two partisan media ecosystems. On the right, there's the world of Fox News, Elon Musk's Twitter, and podcasts like Joe Rogan. And on the left, there's a similar set of news outlets, websites, and podcasts. Many presume this all started with the internet, but in fact, even as far back as the 1940s, researchers following the presidential race between Wendell Willkie and FDR noticed that voters chose media and messages that aligned with their own beliefs. In his 1960 book, The Effects of Mass Communication, Joseph Clapper described this as selective exposure, the idea that people purposely select messages matching their beliefs. The most famous explanation for why this happens is from Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance. The theory argued that people experience mental discomfort when presented with information that doesn't match their beliefs. In order to create what we might call cognitive harmony, people can change their beliefs, and if the evidence is overwhelming, then this is sometimes the response. But this tends to be rare. What happens more normally is people eliminate the discomfort not by changing their beliefs, but through selective exposure, changing the information they're looking at. Whatever the exact psychological cause, it's been clear for a long time that people prefer media that matches their own beliefs. And with the choice voters now have when it comes to media, as well as social media algorithms that learn what you want to see, voters have increasingly split into two separate media ecosystems. Okay, so the media information environment has changed, but what has this got to do with tariffs? Well, since Trump came to power, we've seen how many of Trump's actions have been reframed or explained away by the right-wing media ecosystem. The cuts at Doge are genuinely just about cutting fraud and waste. Threatening to take over Greenland is really about world peace. And the Signal messaging scandal was actually deliberate media strategy.
If you think for 1 second they'd be having these chats over Signal and then be stupid enough to accidentally let a opposition journalist into the chat, man, you really fell for it hook, line, and sinker.
In fact, you can see this dynamic in action for yourself. This is the Ground News website, and I've gone to the story we just mentioned, Greenland and JD Vance's recent trip. If we click here, we can see the way right-leaning news sources are covering the story. For example, focusing on the accusation that Denmark has underinvested in Greenland or that the US wants a partnership, rather than anything more forceful. While on the left-leaning side, I found this article about how Vance is facing a predictable backlash, presenting him in a more negative light. This is Ground News, an app and website that aims to bring together those two media ecosystems so you can see all the angles. It tells you bias distribution, ownership, and factuality ratings of all the sources reporting a story, and there's also a feature called Blind Spot, where you can see the stories that are being underreported by either left or right. I genuinely find this really useful because, as someone who's trying to make the case for the things I believe in, it's really hard to do that if you can't see all the stories and information that other people are seeing. So I think Ground News is worth checking out. They're non-partisan, and there's a good write-up on the site explaining their methodology. Thanks to them for supporting these videos, and you can go to ground.news/Miller or use the QR code to subscribe and get 40% off the Vantage plan. Okay, so Donald Trump announces his tariffs, the market crashes, and then unsurprisingly, the right-wing media ecosystem does its thing.
Don't panic, calm down, everything's gonna be okay.
You know, the uncertainty in the stock market, it isn't necessarily a negative.
Trump's trade war is high risk, high reward. But he's not biting his fingernails staring at the Dow. Today, he actually played golf.
Others were arguing we don't need iPads or video game consoles, and really money is just digital ones and zeros.
Losing money costs you nothing. 2-0. In fact, it builds quite a bit of character.
Some supporters even started attacking Wall Street traders, not normally known as the bastion of anti-Trump resistance.
Wall Street's one of our biggest problems. They're the ones that's really standing up and pushing back against President Trump. Wall Street and the globalists, they do not want change.
There were also lots of efforts to argue it was all part of a master plan.
Trump is crashing the stock market by 20% this month, but he's doing it on purpose.
Trump himself reposted this TikTok on his Truth Social account.
Why is he doing this? To push cash into treasuries, which forces the Fed to slash interest rates in May, and those lower rates give the Fed the ability to refinance trillions of debt very inexpensively. Now, it's a wild chess move, but it's working.
But despite all those efforts of the media ecosystem, the brutal reality of Trump's tariff madness was able to cut through to ordinary voters. After all, more than 60% of Americans own stocks, and millions of small businesses were seeing firsthand price increases and problems sourcing imports. Even on YouTube, you can see people, not normally political, speaking up about this.
And those costs are going to get passed on to you. You might see cameras that used to cost $2,000 now be $600 more.
When I import goods from China, the second it reaches the port, it is held until I personally pay the tariff.
Even many of the streamers and podcasters who've supported Trump in the past started expressing doubts.
Trump has put his tariffs all over the place. I've been trying to understand them, I don't. And everything's in the shitter because of it.
As a result of all this, Republicans came under pressure.
But what's also indisputable is the markets are down about 8% in just 2 days, and I'm getting all kinds of reaction from businesses, farmers in Wisconsin that are highly concerned about what's happening.
A situation made worse by the fact that most Republicans, whatever they might say now, don't really support tariffs.
A tariff is a tax on Americans. A tariff isn't paid by the exporter. China's not going to pay the tariff. The buyer is going to pay the tariff.
Even in Trump's administration, we're seeing splits on the issue.
Navarro is truly a moron.
This time calling him dumber than a sack of bricks.
All these factors contributed to Trump's decision a week after Liberation Day to reverse some of the tariffs. But I don't think that means Trump and the Republicans won't pay a huge price for this. First, as mentioned earlier, the US economy is still in trouble, and people are noticing. Just look at this graph. It shows how 50% of people have heard unfavourable business news coverage of the government. It's way higher than at any point in the last 40 years. And while Trump's most hardline supporters have stayed positive, support amongst others who voted for him in 2024 has plummeted, especially on jobs, the economy and inflation. Remember, while it's normal to select information that suits your beliefs, when reality is overwhelming, the other way to remove cognitive dissonance is to change your beliefs. One thing that's compounding this damage is that while for years Trump has criticised government institutions, science reports and mainstream media, he hasn't done the same thing with the stock market.
I think they have the biggest increase in the history of the stock market. That's pretty good.
This meant that when the graphs and numbers were all pointed down so dramatically in the wake of his big tariffs announcement, they retained a credibility that made them extra powerful. Another damaging aspect of all this are the small ridiculous details in the story.
Like the herd in McDonald Islands. They are near Antarctica and covered in glaciers, home to many penguins, but no people.
Yeah. We put a 10% tariff on an island that only has penguins?
Details like this make the stupidity of the policy easier to grasp, and the humour of it all makes it fun to talk about.
We buy all their skins to make tuxedos, but have they ever bought any fish from us?
Now I should say, despite all this, the media ecosystem on the right is resilient.
This is an absolutely brilliant move.
Brilliant not only economically, politically, and it was good for the American worker.
A huge win for the president, a huge win for the country.
In fact, while in the spirit of balance it would be nice to say left and right are equally bad, research on this area argues the right-wing media ecosystem does in fact show greater insularity than that on the left. But with a story this big, it's hard for those outlets to do business as usual.
You know, I don't want to say this because I'm a patriot, I'm an American, but it is the White House who capitulated.
Be raised in price because companies will pass on the cost of tariffs to consumers. I would expect that. That's why you have some people saying that we could see a recession, we'll see a growth slowdown.
It tells a story of a special needs toy importer. He's been paying a tariff because he gets stuff from China, $26,000 a year. His tariff bill went from $26,000 at midnight to $346,000.
But we should acknowledge that people are feeling very worried right now. They're very nervous. I've lost a lot of money. A lot of people have lost a lot of money in the last week. It's been a brutal week.
With a story this big, it's harder for right-wing media to rationalise and deflect. For while the desire to avoid information that clashes with your beliefs is powerful, when the economic disruption is this strong, the usual defences start to falter. My name is Brendan, and this is the Ideas That Explain the News. Ideas from history, social sciences, economics that explain what's going on at deeper levels. So if you are into that, please do subscribe. I've also got a Substack which you can sign up for, lots of good things on there, and thank you to these lovely people who are supporting me on one of the paid tiers. If you want to do that too, obviously that would be very welcome. But otherwise, I will see you in the next video.